Hey, fake footballers, welcome to the Week 13 starts and sits. We're here. It's the final week for most of us in the regular season for fantasy football, and we're going to jump right into it. I'm your host, Greg Smith, at Greg Sauce on Twitter. We're going to look at our Week 12 picks first, as usual. Quarterbacks are up. It was not a good week for me in terms of the sits. I had Matthew Stafford, Tyrod Taylor, and Kirk Cousins, all as sits. All of them finished as top 10 QBs. Stafford in particular went bananas on Thanksgiving. I think we all saw that. It was the first game of the day, and I just was wallowing the whole time thinking, why did I say to sit Matthew Stafford? Really thought that Eagles defense would show up a little more with a little more energy, and they did not. They were very, very bad. Cutler and Romo were fine sit calls. Romo in particular, I mean, he got hurt, but he wasn't playing well even before that, so I feel that call was still a good one. And on the start side, Winston and Hoyer were both pretty bad calls relatively. I mean, they both scored about 14 points, which isn't going to kill you anyway. QB 20 and QB 23. Hoyer was kind of a popular pick among fantasy analysts, so I don't feel bad going down with that ship because everybody else was on the ship with me there. But Bortles was a nice call, QB 8. Mariota was fine, almost 20 points, QB 15, and Fitzpatrick was a nice call as well, almost 30 points, finishes QB 3. Let's look at running backs. And, I mean, running backs just so weird this season. So many guys have gotten hurt. There are so many timeshares. It's just a really hard position to predict from week to week. And in general, the league is focused so much more on passing now that, performance like 8.2 points from Latavius Murray is kind of okay. I mean, he finishes RB23. That's, a top 24 back. He's a starter in a 12-team league at that point. So, while 8.2 points doesn't look necessarily exciting when you compare it to, some of these double-digit scores, it's serviceable. And, I mean, that was an okay call. Allen and Ware were good. Chris Johnson got hurt in that game against the 49ers. I was actually at that game at Levi's Stadium, first time in the new park there. It was okay, but one beef with any live football experiences, you don't really get to track the injuries that well, and we didn't really realize that Chris Johnson had gotten hurt in that game until after we got home and checked our fantasy scores. But he didn't do much, only 1.7 points before he had to leave. Woodhead was okay, not great, almost 5 points. Pretty discouraging actually relative to where I had him ranked at 24th. James White was a bad call. Brandon Bolden turned out to be the Patriots receiving running back that you wanted in that matchup. And Bilal Powell was kind of in line with what I expected. I ranked him 46th. He finished 43rd, 3.5 points. In PPR, he did a little better. But he's still a nice handcuff option if you have Chris Ivory. On the sit side, Jeremy Hill burned us a little bit. 10 points, RB16. Otherwise, we did okay. I mean, Melvin Gordon was probably the next worst call. He finished right in line with, Murray with 8 points. But still, RB25 versus RB23, maybe that makes a difference to you. To me, it's a wash. I mean, it's not a great call, but it's not like this Latavius Murray call was a bad call either. So both those are kind of in line with each other. Frank Gore, Matt Jones, James Starks. Nothing really to write home about with any of those guys. Let's go to wide receivers. Martavis Bryant, the alien, 14 points, finished inside the top 20. That was a nice one. Allen Hurns, meant to grade this one out. He got hurt in that game, but he still put up 4.2 points, which if a guy's going to get injured and he scores you 4 points before he goes out, you have to take that. That's fine. VJax was okay. Wide receiver 37. James Jones was a bad call, and the Packers are just a mess right now. I just checked on halftime scores of the Detroit and Green Bay game, and James Jones is doing nothing again. The Packers are doing nothing again at 17-0. We did have a couple nice calls that are coming up later when we get to the Game Robotics spreadsheet, but won't tease you anymore with that. Marquez Wilson, this was more a call for if Alshon Jeffrey was out. I did move him down my rankings down to 38 before rosters locked, and he finishes wide receiver 56, 4 points. Not great, but you'll take it, I guess, if you we're desperate enough to start a guy like Marquez Wilson. Hankerson didn't play, so he got dropped from the rankings. And Funchess was another, pretty bad call. Couldn't find the end zone, which is kind of what you're hoping for with that guy. On the sit side, had a few more bad calls, and a lot of these are tied to the sits from the quarterbacks. In particular, Sammy Watkins. I didn't think Tyrod was going to have a very good game. He did great, and Sammy Watkins, right hand in hand with him, did well. Also, T.Y. Hilton outperformed my expectations, and I I think I just need to give that dude more respect on a week-to-week basis on talent alone. I never really liked T.Y., as much as some of the other quote-unquote elite receivers, and I think I was wrong. Like, I am wrong. I have been wrong. I'll be wrong again, and I was wrong on T.Y. Hilton, particularly in Week 12. And Kamar Aiken did fine. Wide receiver 16, 14 points. I think he'll be usable despite Matt Schaub. Rashard Matthews ended up getting hurt, so him finishing with 0 points doesn't really count as a good call. Marvin Jones and Terrence Williams were fine. Anquan Bolden, kind of along the lines of Aiken, I was worried that Gabbert was really going to squash Bolden's value, and it hasn't done that. Bolden has been very usable the past 2 weeks, and I think he will continue to be so moving forward. Tight ends. All pretty good across the board here, except for this Crockett Gilmore call, and maybe that's where the Matt Schaub effect is going to take place. Kind of like what we saw with Matt Castle and Jason Witten. We might be seeing that with Crockett Gilmore and Matt Schaub. So it'll be harder to trust him going forward. I do think he's still the best red zone threat on that team, so I'm not going to outright dismiss him after one bad game because he was pretty good the couple of games before that. But monitor that going forward. If you have better tight end options, which you very well might, there have been a lot of pretty usable tight ends this year. Gilmore might have to go back to the bench for you. Julius Thomas was a nice one. He finishes the top tight end on the week. Brent Selleck caught a TD, so that was a fine call. And Heath Miller did get hurt in this game, but still finishes tight end 25 with 4.5 points. Sit side, Ebron, Witten, Watson, and Clay, all outside the top 20. I will take it. That was a nice set of calls by yours truly. And now we move, as always, to the Game Flowbotics spreadsheet. And we'll look at some DVOA matchups here, offense versus defense, passing and rushing, offensive and defensive line matchups. We've got some injury news here and some over-unders and Vegas spreads. So we'll quickly talk about this Green Bay-Detroit matchup because it's going on right now as I speak. I'm not watching the game because I'm watching my screen recording the video, but prior to kickoff, I did tab Amir Abdullah and Eric Ebron as starts. Ebron, because he's still a valuable receiver in that offense. He had 8 targets the last time they played against the Packers. He didn't catch them all, and that was the problem. And in this game, he has caught one for a TD. So, that was a good-looking call so far. Amir Abdullah and Joique Bell is a sit. These are hand in hand. These are tied together. The Lions are looking at the future, and they're really shifting a lot of those carries from Bell to Abdullah, and I think it's going to be that way for the rest of the season. And as long as this Lions offense is clicking, I think Abdullah is a guy you need to consider as a top 20, top 24 option at running back. So let's get to our first real preview for Week 13. The Jets and the Giants, both, supposedly New York teams playing in New Jersey. What do we see here? We got a pretty decent total, 45 points. There are a lot of low totals this week, by the way. The Jets are minor favorites on the road, probably as it should be. Their defense, while it has been uninspiring recently, is still pretty good. And the Giants give up a lot of points and a lot of passing yardage for the most part. They rank 25th in the league against the pass. And with that in mind, Fitzpatrick, you get in there, your start this week. The Giants allow the 3rd most fantasy points per game overall positions, and the 4th most points per game to quarterbacks. So Fitzpatrick's a nice value here. Perennial or weekly floor guy. He always seems to get you, between 13 and 18 points. And, last week he really exploded for almost 30. He might do that again here against the Giants. Rashad Jennings is a sit. The Jets defense is still, tops in the league. They rank 1st in DVOA. So this should probably mean more Vereen and less Jennings in this matchup. Let's move on to Arizona and St. Louis. Arizona, almost 6-point favorites here on the road. Low total again, 42.5 points. And what do we know? Well, we know that David Johnson is the kind of clear-cut running back in what used to be a heinous committee of 3 running backs. So fire him up, man. Start him up. St. Louis defense has been a lot more susceptible to running backs with the absence and hobbledness of Robert Quinn, that their star defensive lineman. And David Johnson, now that he has the volume supposedly coming in this game, he's a guy I like. One thing to appreciate about him in this matchup is that even if they're having trouble getting the ball going on the run, Johnson can still stay involved in the passing game, and they do like to use him like that. He was already the goal line back. This is a really good spot for him, despite what appears to be a tough matchup against what used to be like a really stout defense. St. Louis ranks third in DVOA, third against the pass, fifth against the rush. So don't be scared off by that. Get David Johnson in your lineup and use him. We'll go to Atlanta and Tampa Bay next. Tampa Bay 2-point favorites at home. Kind of unexpected. I mean, they're not getting a ton of respect. I mean, the standard line for a home team would be -3, but, when was the last time Tampa Bay was favored against Atlanta? I mean, the Falcons have kind of fallen apart here. There's a nice total, 46 points. I tend to like both offenses, particularly the passing games. Atlanta ranks 22nd in passing defense. Tampa Bay ranks 24th. So you can feel pretty good about Matt Ryan this week. And I do like Jameis Winston on the other side of the ball. I'm not going to tab him as a start per se because there are more quarterbacks I want to highlight, and I feel like I've used Winston a lot. Plus, I want to talk about Winston next week when he faces the Saints. So I'm not going to overload you with Jameis talk, but I am going to mention his, the backup tight end to Austin Seferian-Jenkins, Cameron Brate. Brate has at least 47 yards and a touchdown in his past 2 games, and Atlanta allows the third most passes per game to tight ends, 9.3. They're not necessarily allowing the most yardage, but teams are attacking Atlanta with the tight end, and based on recent usage and the fact that Atlanta tends to be vulnerable to that position, I like Brate here as a really deep play. Now, again, I'm not starting him over a lot of the other top tight ends, but if you're looking for a really deep streaming option, Brate is a nice one. He's been pretty good lately. Otherwise, I think it's kind of all systems go for your standard Falcons and Buccaneers in this matchup. Get your wide receivers going. The one guy you might be concerned about based upon DVOA is Devontae Freeman going against Tampa Bay's second-ranked rushing defense. But I think if you have him and he's deemed healthy enough to play in this game, you'll probably use him. On the flip side, if Freeman doesn't play and Tevin Coleman is the guy who gets the nod, this defense might scare me off of playing him in this matchup. So just keep that in mind. Let's go to Seattle in Minnesota next. Seattle somehow with a worse record than the Vikings. That is probably not what people would have envisioned at the beginning of the season, but that's where we're at. It's a pick in Vegas, which is pretty rare, and there's a tiny total here, 41.5 points. So 2 defensive-minded teams. We can't really get excited about any of the offensive options. I mean, you're going to play Adrian Peterson if you got him. I think if you have Thomas Rawls, you're starting him as well. But I don't feel great about either quarterback, and Bridgewater in particular going up against this Seattle team that has the 7th best defense overall and the 8th best passing defense by DVOA. Another concern for Bridgewater is that the Seahawks have the 11th best adjusted sack rate on their defensive line, whereas the Vikings do not protect the quarterback all that well. They rank 27th in adjusted sack rate. So it's possible that Bridgewater's going to have a rough day. And with that in mind, I don't like Stefon Diggs as number 1 receiver either. The Seahawks are really good at taking away opposing receivers, especially if there's only one guy they really need to worry about, which has been the case with Minnesota for a few weeks now. Diggs is their only real threat. The Seahawks rank 2nd in DVOA against number 1 wideouts. So you can really do better this week than Diggs. I'd look elsewhere. The last sit I want to mention here is Luke Wilson. This isn't really a news flash. You're probably not desperate enough to use Luke Wilson in the first place, but we really just can't expect him to, fill the role of Jimmy Graham. That's just not a fair expectation for him against a solid defense like the Vikings. They're not great against the tight end. They're kind of middle of the road in tight end defense, according to DVOA, but Wilson just isn't an elite threat. And while he may, get a random touchdown, I don't think you want to bank on that, because if he doesn't get the TD, he's not going to get you that floor of, 4 to 6 tight end points from receptions. He might do that, don't get me wrong, but I really think you can do a lot better this week. Let's go to Houston and Buffalo. Buffalo 3-point favorites, another very low total, 41.5 points again. And so we've got to just take down all the offensive players a peg in this matchup, or all the fringe guys at least. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins is a guy you're going to use. Sammy Watkins, while I don't love him in this matchup, is probably still, a top 24, top 30, at least flex-worthy play. The Houston defense has really come on lately, particularly against the pass. They're up to 6th in DVOA against the pass, and so that has me scared off Tyrod Taylor. I'm also out on Charles Clay. Houston ranks 5th in DVOA against tight ends. So those are guys that, I don't think you want to use this week if you can help it. Tyrod proved me wrong last week. He very well might do it again here. But this is fantasy football. We can't, allow recency bias to affect us too much. I do like Tyrod as a player, and I do think that, he could have success in this game. especially based on his mobility. But you can't trust it. I'd look elsewhere. On the Texans side of the ball, this is more of a two quarterback note than anything else, but Brian Hoyer's a sit for me this week. The Houston defense has taken a lot of the weight off of Hoyer's shoulders. He doesn't have to really carry the team and pass 40 times a game anymore, and that limited volume really exposes how inefficient he is as a passer, and so it hurts him. I don't necessarily want to see him pass less because I am a DeAndre Hopkins owner in a couple leagues, but this is just the state of the Texans that we're looking at right now. So in two quarterback leagues, I'd probably not use Hoyer unless I absolutely had to. Buffalo's passing defense isn't great. They're 15th in the league, kind of middle of the pack, but the combination of that kind of middling matchup plus just the awesome play that we've seen from Houston's defense has me thinking that Hoyer is not necessarily the best option. Baltimore and Miami are next. Couple of really bad passing defenses here, 26th and 27th in the league. I'm kind of surprised that the total is so low because of that. 43.5 points. I would probably take the over in this game. I mean, both the defenses overall aren't good either. I mean, Baltimore's 26th, Miami's 28th. Maybe this is a nod to the new coaching staff in Miami, the new coaching staff in Miami. It's possible that Vegas is expecting, just a grinded out game on both sides of the ball, a lot of Javorius Allen, a lot of Lamar Miller. And I know based upon the defenses, I don't necessarily expect that. And I like a lot of the passing options here. Ryan Tannehill, Kamar Aiken, Devontae Parker. Parker, really showed us something when Rashard Matthews went out last week. He came on, caught the TD. I think he had about 80 yards. And, we always knew he was talented. Now he has the opportunity. He's had some time to learn the offense and, adjust to the NFL to some extent. He hasn't been getting a whole lot of playing time, but, this is a good matchup for him against Baltimore. Aiken, similarly, we saw that he remained relevant in spite of Schaub. On the flip side, Chris Givens didn't. He's a sit for me. But, yeah, that's what I'm seeing in this game, and that's who I like and don't like. Let's keep going. Cincinnati and Cleveland are next. The Bengals, 9.5-point road favorites. Another very small over-under, 43.5 points. I think you can start all your Bengals with confidence here. Andy Dalton's, a top 5, top 8 QB for me. AJ Green, Eifert, if he plays, I think you're using him. Both running backs should be usable here. Jeremy Hill and Giovanni Bernard are facing off against Cleveland's 28th ranked rushing defense. But Cleveland sucks against the pass too, 29th. Cincinnati should have no problem moving the ball. And hopefully they'll get out to a nice lead, and that'll allow both running backs to get some play into the second half once they are up by a certain amount. I'm only going to tab one guy as a dead set sit here, who may not be obvious, as Travis Benjamin. He's been pretty good overall, but the last time they faced the Bengals, he did not play very well, and the new quarterback situation in Cleveland with Austin Davis is just not one that I'm willing to trust out of the gate. I need to see 1 week of him, being able to keep Benjamin relevant. And based upon this matchup, I don't know if that's the case. Now, Benjamin could get involved in garbage time. That's the one risk of me calling him a sit here. But now that there are no teams on bye, I have a feeling you can probably find a more appealing option than Benjamin. Next up, Jacksonville and Tennessee. Tennessee, 2.5-point favorites here at home, 43-point total. Doesn't sound like Allen Hurns is going to play in this game. He still hasn't practiced after his concussion, so I definitely want to fire up Julius Thomas here. Tennessee allows the 9th most fantasy points per game to tight ends, and they rank 24th in DVOA against that position, so Thomas is a nice start yet again. For Tennessee, I like the passing options, Kendall Wright, Delaney Walker. The Jacksonville Jaguars are a lot easier to pass against than they are to run against. They rank 30th against the pass in DVOA, but 4th against the rush. So I'm using Wright and I'm using Walker. I'm not using Antonio Andrews. Let's go to the Niners and the Bears. Bears at home here, 7-point favorites, 43-point total. Not looking good for the Niners, but with that said, I do like a couple of these options here as value plays. Sean Drone and Anquan Bolden. I talked about this earlier, but Bolden has really come back to life since Gabbert became the QB there in San Francisco. I like him here against Chicago defense they've been better. They rank 16th against the pass, but with this spread, San Francisco's probably going to have to throw, and that means Bolden's going to continue to see targets. And that sort of throwing game script doesn't necessarily kill Sean Drone. The Niners have been bad for a few games now, and Sean Drone has continued to produce and catch a lot of passes. He's a really appealing PPR play, and he's got a pretty good floor, even in standard leagues, because he sees that volume in the passing game. For the Bears, I love Jay Cutler. The Niners rank 31st in DVOA passing defense, and they have a really hard time getting to the QB, 27th in adjusted sack rate. Whereas the Bears are good at blocking for the pass. They rank 5th in adjusted sack rate on the offensive line side. So Cutler should have time to throw, go through his progressions, maybe get a couple deep shots off to Anquan Bolden or maybe the return Martellus Bennett. Anyway, I just love Cutler this week. He's a really nice play. I'm tabbing Jeremy Langford as a start. I do like Matt Forte more. I'm assuming, Forte is a week healthier and ready to be the, primary back, but we've seen that Langford is good, and he's probably not going to go away. It definitely seems like this is a time-sharing effect, kind of along the lines of LaShawn McCoy and Carlos Williams in Buffalo before the Williams injury. So Langford, it seems like he's going to be usable. And even before, earlier in the season, he was getting goal line work when Forte was healthy. I think that he's shown enough to convince the Bears and convince fantasy owners that he's usable on a weekly basis. Not a great ranking for me. He'll probably be in the 20 to 25 range, but usable. Next up, Denver and San Diego. The Broncos are 4-point favorites here on the road. Not that San Diego has any sort of home field advantage. 43-point over/under, man. Where are all the points going to get scored this week? Some of these games are definitely going to go higher, and if we can figure out where those games are going to be, you can definitely find some value there. This might be one of those games for Denver. The San Diego defense is not good. 30th in DVOA, 31st in weighted DVOA. So that means they're playing worse lately. They're terrible against the run, 32nd, and they're bad against the pass too, 28th. That terrible rushing rank for the Chargers, I almost called them the Padres there, is very, very good for CJ Anderson and Ronnie Hillman. But I want to highlight Anderson in particular here because he did look so good last week. He really showed what we thought he was going to look like when we drafted him in the preseason. And I'm more and more convinced with every week that we see him improve that his struggles early in the season were based on that turf toe injury. And I've talked about this ad nauseum on the starts and sits videos. I feel like I haven't talked about it for a couple weeks, so I'm bringing it up again. But Anderson is a guy I love in this matchup. I think you got to use him if you have him. And, at this point in the season, you probably can afford to, tab him as a flex relative rather than your, number one or number two running back, just because there have been so many free agent finds. On the sit side, Rivers and Stevie Johnson, you just can't trust them going against Denver's defense. We're talking about the best defense in the league still, and the best passing defense in the league. So don't use your Chargers. This is just not a good spot for them. Let's go to another AFC West matchup, the Chiefs and the Raiders. Kansas City 3-point favorites here on the road. A lot of action on the Raiders, though. The VIG got up to -120. That means that just more people have bet on the Raiders at this line. So there's some thought that maybe Kansas City is overvalued here. The over-under is 44 points, which is high for this week somehow. That's terrifying, but that's the way it is. The Kansas City defense has been very good recently, and their team has been very good recently. They rank 3rd in total DVOA now, and when you wait for recent performance, they actually rank 1st. So they're playing better than anybody else right now, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, where, again, they rank 6th overall, but 4th in weighted DVOA, so they're improving. They've been a lot better recently. That could spell some trouble for the Oakland offensive weapons in this game. I don't have Derek Carr as high as I've had him in recent weeks, and his receivers, Amari Cooper, Michael Crabtree, I don't think you can bench either of them, but I wouldn't be surprised if only one of them performed at a startable level this week. So I'm not necessarily tabbing any of these guys as sits. Latavius Murray is probably the one guy I would tend to avoid the most. The Chiefs do rank 8th against the rush, but he'll still probably be within my top 25 or so running backs, at least flex worthy. I don't know. It's a tough call. I definitely wouldn't fault you for sitting him, but I'm not going to outright say that he's a bad play here. But I will say that on the Kansas City side of the ball, Alex Smith and Charcandrick West are guys that I like this week. Smith, like Ryan Fitzpatrick, every week tends to put up, just a solid floor of points, 13 to 15 points, sometimes more. He's only had one really bad week, and that was week 2 against Denver. West, on the other hand, Some people might be moving off of him now that Spencer Ware has kind of asserted himself as, a force to be reckoned with in that backfield. But you know what? West is still going to get the most touches, assuming health. And while Ware might get some goal line carries, I think that West will be fine. He's going to stay involved in the passing game, which is good, especially if Oakland does, kind of keep up in this game. They tend to play better at home. So I like West here. It is a nice matchup against the Raiders' 22nd ranked rushing defense. And I mean, the overall lesson with these running backs is that I think any decent running back is going to perform well for Kansas City. They're very good up front. They rank 5th in offensive line adjusted line yards for running the ball, and then they rank 1st in rushing offense DVOA. So this is just a good running team. So whoever they line up back there is going to succeed for the most part. And if West is getting the majority of those carries, which I think he will, this is a good spot for him. Next up, Carolina and New Orleans. Finally, a big total, 49.5 points. And you know what? Most of those points are expected to go to Carolina. They are 7-point favorites in this matchup, even on the road. With that in mind, I love Ted Ginn here. He's not necessarily a matchup winner, but it's not like he's playing against a real defense here. The Saints can't stop anybody, and so Ginn should get open. For New Orleans, I don't really like anybody that they're throwing out there this week against Carolina's number 2 defense, particularly in the passing game. Carolina ranks 2nd in DVOA there as well. Their pass defense is just excellent. They succeed against every type of receiver. They're 1st in DVOA against wide receiver 1s, 7th against wide receiver 2s, 5th against other wide receivers, 2nd against tight ends, and 9th against running backs as receivers. So Drew Brees, CJ Spiller, Willie Snead. I'm sorry, no thanks. I'm not using any of those guys if I can help it. Brandon Cooks definitely gets a downgrade this week, but he did okay the last time these two teams squared off. So Cooks is a guy I think you can use if you want to, but he's definitely in that, wide receiver 3 or flex territory relative to, the wide receiver 2 area he might be in other weeks. Let's go now to Philly and New England. This is our last late afternoon game on Sunday. The Patriots are 10-point favorites. Another big total, 49.5 points. Definitely saved the best for last in terms of offense. And I think you're using the usual suspects here. Brady, Chandler, in the absence of Gronk, is a guy who I think everybody's on at this point, so I'm not even going to tab him as a start. Danny Amendola should be back in this game, and if he plays, I love him here. He'll be a top 20 option for me. With Gronk out, Amendola is really going to have to step up. LaFell is in a good spot as well, but I think he's actually a better value if Amendola plays and takes some of the defensive attention away. I think if LaFell is the only legit receiver that they're running out there, that could be trouble for him. Philly, isn't the greatest defense, and they've been very bad lately. But, they still overall rank 10th in passing defense DVOA. I understand that these numbers are dropping every week. I mean, if we want to go back to, a previous week, they would have been a lot higher. But in this example, if LaFell is the only, wide receiver that they need to worry about, it's a lot easier to take that away. Whereas if LaFell and Amendola are both playing, that's when the Eagles are really going to be in trouble. So I think that Amendola making the lineup is going to be a boon for both receivers there. No absolute must-sits in this game, but some of the Eagles guys I might avoid if I can help it. DeMarco Murray should be fine, especially considering the fact that Ryan Matthews doesn't look like he's going to play. But look at this spread, 10 points. Philly might just get game flowed right out of this game into a state where, they're throwing all the time. Darren Sproles is in the backfield like crazy. Just tread lightly if you're thinking about using any of your Eagles. Sunday Night Football is next. The Colts and the Steelers. Steelers 7-point favorites at home. There was no over-under on this game. I'm not exactly sure why that was. Probably based upon Roethlisberger. I'm assuming he's playing. So I like him and all of his receiving options. Antonio Brown, Martavis Bryant. Heath Miller, if he plays, should be fine here. If he doesn't play, Jesse James is a nice deep option that you might want to consider if you're in like a 16-team or 20-team league, something like that. But all the starts and sits for this game are going to be Colts. The Steelers are a lot easier to pass on than they are to run on. They rank 9th against the run, 19th against the pass in DVOA. So I like Matt Hasselbeck. I like Dante Moncrief a lot in this matchup. With that said, I don't really like Coby Fleener. He hasn't really been quite as involved since Hasselbeck has taken over as the QB. So he's a sit for me. I'm also saying sit Frank Gore because, again, this is a game where the Steelers are figured to get up pretty big at some point. I mean, they're 7-point favorites, and if Frank Gore gets game flowed out, that's not good. and he might just not have anywhere to run, even if he doesn't. The Steelers are pretty stout against the run with that 9th ranked DVOA rating. Last up on the week, Dallas and Washington. Washington 4.5-point favorites, 42-point total. Oh man, we're back into the dregs of the league again. So it's such a bummer for ESPN. Their Monday Night Football games have been so bad. And the games haven't necessarily been bad, but the matchups have not been very relevant or exciting, leading up to the game. So we'll see what happens in this game. This could have some playoff implications for Washington if they want to have any hopes of winning that terrible division. But anyway, what are we seeing here? I mean, the low total. The low total definitely doesn't bode well for offenses here. If we're going to use anybody, it's probably guys on the Washington side of the ball. I don't think any of those guys necessarily stand out as surefire starts, though. I mean, Kirk Cousins is usable in a 2 QB league, if not, pretty unexciting. Pierre Garçon, Deshaun Jackson, Jordan Reed, all startable. I mean, Reed is definitely the guy I like the most of those three. Jamison Crowder is a guy I'm going to sit, though. Definitely seems that he's been kind of, forgive the pun, crowded out since Deshaun Jackson has gotten healthy. So I don't really like him here. And Matt Jones, he had the opportunity to kind of assert himself as the lead guy in that backfield, and he just keeps fumbling. And it seems like the advantage is definitely back in Alfred Morris's side of the court. So Jones is a sit. For the Cowboys, Terrence Williams, Jason Witten, I think 2 weeks in a row I've recommended against these guys, and that's the Matt Castle effect. You just can't use them if Castle is, the QB. I mean, even Dez this week is a guy that I'm kind of afraid to use. I have him in one league, and I might even sit him. Dez is kind of scary with Matt Castle at the helm. I mean, I have a feeling he'll be fine. Castle will probably force feed the ball to him, but I'm sure that the Washington defense will be keying on him to some extent, and I don't know. I think if maybe you happen to be on a team that has a lot of really good receiving options, I could see benching Dez this week. I'm doing it in a league. It's a keeper league where I have plenty of other good wide receivers, but I'm probably not the only one in that sort of a situation when it comes to Dez Bryant. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to tab him as a sit, but he's a guy I'm a little wary of. I would like to see how he does this week before, I start ranking him up in that, top 5, even top 10 range that we're so used to having him. Anyway, that'll do it. Let's wrap things up. It's been a short and sweet video. Been a little behind on getting this stuff all together, so thank you for bearing with the motor mouth. I appreciate your viewership, as always, and your readership if you continue past the video to check out the written portion of these pieces. Anyway, good luck. Hopefully we'll get you into the fantasy playoffs in this last week of the regular fantasy season. Go get them, and we'll catch you next time. Adios.